Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Research America Alliance discussion. We're so grateful that you've joined us and for your partnership in Research America. I don't want to pummel you too hard in terms of membership, but if you aren't an Alliance member, I hope that your organization will think about it. We'd love to have you join us. We're stronger for the more members that we have, and we can do better advocacy for faster medical and public health progress and patient centricity, which is our topic today. I'm so thrilled that our special guest today is Randall Rutta. He is a CEO of the National Health Council. And I think you probably know Randy. He is just such a thought leader and a leader generally in patient engagement and patient-informed R&D. So Randy is joining us to talk about his work with NHC and the organization's vision going forward to how to move more quickly down the field when it comes. I'm sorry to keep using cliches here, but anyway, to go faster towards truly putting patients at the center of the R&D ecosystem and how we as advocates can advance that goal. So as always, if you wouldn't mind typing your questions into the Q&A box or to the chat, we'll pose as many as we can during the Q&A portion of today's session. And Randy, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Ellie. And I'm delighted to be able to join the Research America Alliance today to talk about this critical topic. But thank you to Mary Woolley, the whole Research America team. We are all such kindred spirits in trying to advance, a research agenda and trying to advance discovery in a way that truly benefits patients and all of those around patients. And at the center of that is making sure that patients, people who are in the healthcare system, particularly those with chronic conditions and disabilities, are at the table, and some would argue are the table when it comes to decisions being made about their health. And so I'm just really, really pleased to be with you today. For those of you that might not know the National Health Council, we're an organization of nonprofit patient groups that was founded more than 100 years ago. There's our membership. Many of you perhaps on the call are at these organizations. And our sole focus is to advance the voice of the patient, to make sure that those people that are in the healthcare system day in and day out due to chronic conditions, complex conditions, age-related impairments, disabilities, truly have a voice in the care and treatment they receive, are part of improving how those care systems and treatments are made available, and are just there for each other, which is what our organizations are so good at. And I would say, put the next slide if you like, the National Health Council and its members are absolutely longtime champions of involving patients and the patient perspective in all aspects of healthcare, where decisions are being made that specifically affect their health and well-being. And so I put power of patients in front of us because, as many of you know, yesterday was the 32nd, believe it or not, anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so this is a landmark legislation which began and has since been improved to prevent discrimination on the basis of disability. And the movement was kicked off even more so when you think about patient engagement by the AIDS crisis, and you see silence equals death. And so for patient advocates, if they're not part of the conversation, they're at risk. And this is what we'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. So when you think about who we are and what we do, the National Health Council's members, I say, longtime champions, and we have a vision for patient engagement. So as Ellie said, it's about patient centricity, making sure that patients are centered in any process on decision making that is meaningful engagement and meaningful to them. And so this is critically important. And what do we mean by meaningful patient engagement? We refer to bi-directional, reciprocal, continuous, that truly is embracing the patient and the lived experience that they have, their dreams and aspirations, not just for their health, but for their life, is all part of what we take into consideration by inviting them to share and help make these decisions and contribute to how society addresses both research and then what flows from research. Communications have to be open and honest and clear. Engagement goals, participant methods, desired impacts, these are all part of what we talk about when we talk about patient engagement and patient centricity. So you can see our statement, patients should be the key drivers of this effort instead of simply being observers to efforts on their behalf. For a long time, we talked about patient-centered. We talked about ways in which patients were clearly prioritized, particularly in the healthcare system, but that oftentimes meant that those individuals, maybe they were clinicians, maybe they were researchers, maybe they were other individuals supporting their care, talked about them, not to them. And that, as we know, is not going to get to the best outcome. Next slide, please. So when we think about patient engagement, as I mentioned, if you look back 1992, you've got silence equals death. You've got the movement around the accelerated approval and of research processes to develop, hopefully at that point in time, a way to mitigate and cure HIV disease. You think about the trajectory that particular course of treatment has taken. It's nothing short of miraculous. Now HIV and many other conditions are conditions that are managed as opposed to conditions that are terminal. This is really critical, and patients really were at the beginning of kicking off this movement. And you see through this timeline, as we come up to today, how many different players have taken up this idea of patient engagement, how many different agencies and others have established this priority, or even as in Pecori's case, been established with input from the patient community to have that patient-centric focus. So progress is being made, and I share this slide because you can see all of the different touch points that we should be aware of, that we can promote patient engagement, help promote a capacity to have those patients in the seats that are made available through this process, either by requirement or now by practice, and that we all collectively have a role to play to make sure that the progress that you see here is sustained and improved. So we go to the next slide, please. So when you think about our work, we're focused on engagement around policy development, medicine and medical device development, treatment delivery models, value assessment, payment models, and other quality measurements. All of this success you saw reflected in really where we've come from the Americans with Disabilities Act, but then also how that's been expanded through the Affordable Care Act or PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. It's been achieved through patient advocacy and with an eye on how patients can then be involved in the day-to-day operations of each of those key functions in our decision-making process, in our policy-making process, in our actual experience of healthcare in the field. We're continually ensuring that they best meet the needs of people with chronic conditions and disabilities by being activists in this space. And so one of the areas that I want to talk about is patient-focused drug development. Now, for us, I mentioned patient-centric means processes, programs, decisions that are focused on patients that play an active role in meaningfully engaged participants. Patients, again, patient-centeredness again means doing things with, not for or to patients. And to have meaningful patient engagement, I mentioned, it really needs to be so inclusive and holistic that truly the patient feels respected, included, and heard. I mentioned patients have to be key drivers. So how is it that this has been taken up by, let's say, for example, the FDA, which is probably one of the best places for us to point to, where this line of thinking and this responsiveness to patient advocates that led to action can really be seen in real time. So we were one of the first organizations, the National Health Council and its members, to call for the FDA to conduct its 21 plus patient-focused drug development meetings as part of PDUFA 5. And at the time, we always knew that FDA conducting these meetings was intended to develop lessons learned in engaging patients to learn their views on their condition, existing treatments, options, desired outcomes for future treatments. But then that next step was to encourage drug and device researchers to seek this perspective and incorporate it into clinical development. To do this, we knew that they would need clear guidance from the FDA on how to do it, and also encouragement that the data collected would be used by the FDA. And this is why we called for such guidance in PDUFA 6. Now, PDUFA 6 includes a number of guidances. That's what you see here on the screen. It's a commitment from FDA to develop these as a series of 4 guidelines. The guidance 1 is collecting comprehensive and representative input. Guidance 2, finalized just this past February, identifies methods for identifying what's important to patients. Guidance 3, and that was just a draft released, I guess, last month from FDA, talks about selecting and developing or modifying fit-for-purpose clinical outcome assessments. And then lastly, the 4th guidance is incorporating clinical outcome assessments into endpoints for regulatory decision-making. Now, the National Health Council, and we can go to the next slide if you like, the National Health Council was pleased with the first 2 guidances, and they really laid the groundwork for the final 2 that I just mentioned just now. We provided substantial feedback to the agency, and we're happy to see additional resources such as a glossary and case examples included. I mentioned that 3rd guidance, which is currently out for comment, and if this is something that really is of interest to you, you should look at this guidance and see how it is from your organization's perspective. You may want to weigh in because comment is critical. Not only does this continue the patient-focused drug development process, it also expands and updates the 2009 patient-reported outcomes guidance. And it's intended to help sponsors select and use high-quality clinical outcome assessments, which is broader than only patient-reported outcomes. The guidance gives an overview of what COAs are, what they assess, how they're used, and how to determine that they are fit for purpose. It also offers up a roadmap to patient-focused outcome measurement and guidance on how sponsors can submit justification for the selection of measurements. Now, the National Health Council is currently working with our members to hear their reaction to this guidance, and we will be putting together comments that will be submitted in September, which is when they're due. So again, you're welcome to contact us and engage with the Health Council, whether you're a member or not, to understand where we're coming from. And certainly as member organizations participate both in the development and then the submission of these comments. And I expect that we'll largely focus on the need to select COAs that have been developed with patient input when possible, or how to seek patient input to update them. Now, many legacy measures have been developed with little patient input to create confidence. They are measuring outcomes that are most important to patients. So I think some of these legacy measures can evolve and in many cases, perhaps even be augmented or substituted for measures now that are truly measuring what's most important to patients. So you are probably aware that the PDUFA reauthorization is currently in front of Congress. We're pleased that both that the FDA has indicated to Congress that they're very supportive of moving forward with many of the recommendations that have come from the patient community. And let me just highlight a few for you. 1, conducting demonstration projects, including engagement with stakeholders such as patient organizations, opening the door for organizations like yours and members of the Health Council to really be involved in demonstration projects that enhance patient engagement in the user fee supported programs. Convening a series of public meetings or workshops with key stakeholders, including patients. Absolutely critical that we have these real-time opportunities to engage with the FDA, who in my experience has always been very open to that kind of a dialogue, but it's occurring obviously in the context of these PDUFA reforms and the program that currently exists, which means I think it'll be more meaningful and point more to actionable items and results than perhaps just an open forum conversation that you're never quite sure really made a difference. We see support for establishing a cross-center committee with the role, among other priorities, of engaging stakeholders. That's critical because there's so many touch points at the FDA and throughout this process where we want to have patients involved. And it's best if those different touch points or those different parts of the organization or process are aware that others are involved in kind of where they are and who's being engaged so that they can all benefit from the input that they're receiving and that a coordinated response can follow. creating a DHT framework document, which is critical, and then publishing guidance for the use of DHTs in traditional and decentralized clinical trials. This is all incredibly important, and the slide that's in front of you right now really shows that roadmap to patient-focused outcome measurement in clinical trials. As you also know, we are very interested in clinical trials along with our industry partners and the FDA in making sure that clinical trials represent the diversity of the patient population, the American population. And so we know many of our clinical trial sponsors have been working to be more and more inclusive and represent that diversity in their trials. Certainly patient groups have a role to play in helping these plan sponsors locate patients who would then certainly demonstrate the level of diversity that we're looking for. And we feel that we have a critical role to play. Pharma just recently announced a very exciting initiative, which has engaged Yale University, Morehouse, and Vanderbilt in looking to see how in 10 communities in the Southeast and Southwest, we could develop a system of patient engagement that is truly, clinical trials, patient engagement in clinical trials that is truly equitable. So there's real momentum here within the industry, within the patient community, and I think working together, we can achieve these goals. Now, one of the ways that the National Health Council is trying to contribute to this effort, and you can go to the next slide if you like, is by developing a framework to help rectify, the ability to focus on what's important to patients. As Ellie said, patient centricity, patient engagement, really understanding the patient from the perspective expressed by the patient is clearly what we're looking to do. So the National Health Council created a framework, we call it the patient-centered core impact sets, which are really looking at outcomes and then beyond. We're really looking at what the patients would identify as the most critical aspects of their journey through a clinical trial, through a treatment experience from diagnosis, hopefully to a good health outcome. You'll see from this slide that a PC-CIS is a patient prioritized list of impacts that a disease and or its treatments have on patients and their family caregivers. And it's intentionally broad. Impacts includes health outcomes and all other related implications that may be part of a patient's lived experience. It could be career stress, it could be out-of-pocket costs, it could be work loss. It could be a whole series of what's come to be known as social drivers or social determinants of health. All of these things are real in a patient's lived experience in their day-to-day life. And all of these then have a role to play in how a patient is going to be able to engage and take advantage of new and emerging treatments, particularly in a clinical trial or research setting, but then also as then those interventions are out there in the healthcare community and available to them, we always have to make sure that we're listening to patients and understanding at every part of that journey that it's the right choice at the right time as they define what it is they're looking for. So we expect that this tool will assist patient advocacy groups and others capture the impacts that are actually important to patients, rather than what clinicians or other stakeholders might prioritize as important. The National Health Council was recently awarded the Eugene Washington Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI, Engagement Award. This award has helped to coordinate a multi-stakeholder dialogue to socialize patient-centered core impact sets through a blueprint, and that's scheduled for release on August 17. And I'm very excited that we're at this point to have this blueprint to offer. The timing couldn't be better. It is a multi-stakeholder dialogue that will occur on the 17th to socialize this concept of PC-CIS and conduct a public comment period to review PC-CIS before we really unveil it as a finished product that we'll be recommending everybody use. So for those of you on this call, other patients and caregivers, patient advocates, medical product developers, value assessors, academicians, anyone interested in patients and patient-centered research, we really encourage you to join the dialogue and provide comments on this PC-CIS blueprint. In fact, the two individuals working at the National Health Council with me, others who are serving in a consulting role, are on this call. And if there's during the question and answer period, if there's questions about this or about some of the information I provided around the PDUFA reauthorization and patient-focused drug development, I do have colleagues on the call with direct and expert advice and information they could share with you. But I have to say that while much of our work focuses on the FDA, we know that drug discovery and regulation is global. And that's why I'm very pleased to serve on the board of the Patient-Focused Medicine Development Organization. If you want to go to the next slide, you can. And that is an organization that works very much in concert with the National Health Council. Many of our partner organizations here in the United States and abroad contribute to this patient-focused medicine development, but from a European perspective, many of the tools that you'll see the National Health Council feature on our website or highlight or recommend for use have been developed certainly in coordination with PFMD, but oftentimes in collaboration, or even where we may defer to PFMD to develop an aspect of an important resource for you, maybe taxonomy. We're just simply getting agreement over how words are defined by all these different systems will help us avoid those gray areas that can so often delay how it is any part of the patient engagement process or drug development process goes forward. We want clarity, we want simplicity, we want consistency. So I'll just describe a little bit. You can see the objective for, why don't we go to the next slide, please. There's just to mention lastly, so the draft blueprint, there's the progress report that we have. So it's the blueprint, we're gonna circulate the draft, hold the PCORI funded multi-stakeholder meetings, which are unfolding right now, finalize the blueprint, and I highly encourage you to be involved. Next slide, please. Okay, here's PFMD. I kind of skipped ahead. And I know my colleagues, Omar and Silke, were like, oh, you've got to make one final call. Everyone should really circle back to us, take a look at this blueprint, join us on August 17th, and then absolutely contribute to how it is we advance that blueprint. And again, that blueprint is something that we are sharing with and jointly refining with input from this patient-focused medicine development organization. And you can see their slogan, made with patients. You can go to the next slide. You'll see their purpose. It's a global initiative which strives to design patient-centered health systems with patients, as you see. Its mission is to bring together initiatives and best practices that integrate the voice of the patient and speed up the creation of an effective, globally standardized framework. So this organization, like the National Health Council, like Research America, is looked to by decision makers, be they in the policy sector, in the payment sector, coverage that occurs within health plans and how formularies are put together and how access occurs in the research area. We are all go-to organizations in this conversation, and PFMD is very much a part of this process, representing, but then also caring about and supporting the work we're doing here in the United States. When we look at how it is they've organized their work, it's a three-pronged strategic approach to scale patient engagement and drug development, build the conditions and enablers of patient engagement, and build patient engagement in digital health and data. So I'd like to just share some slides with you that come from PFMD, which really do call out kind of how they're structuring their work, how they've reached out to engage organizations like yours and ours. You should know that patient organizations are very much a constituency represented at the patient-focused medicine development. Here you can see their membership. Thank you. There, a lot of our industry partners, as well as our health organizations like Lupus and Global Heart and others on National Health Council, very much collaborative with patient-focused medicine development in Europe, very much aligned with patient-focused drug development efforts here in the United States. So you would be welcome to explore participation, and it's also free to nonprofit organizations, which for all of us, budget's a consideration, and it's great that they can be so inclusive of organizations like ours, because at the end of the day, we are part and parcel to the mission of this organization. Next slide, please. So when you look at how they talk about themselves, they talk about the governance. You can see where they're really looking for a significant level of patient organization and nonprofit participation in their governance structure. Also, you'll see that diversity is a critical priority for them, of stakeholder groups, geography, culture, and race, gender, skills, patient organizations, size and scope. These are all elements that they take into consideration as they kind of put together not just their membership, but then where it is they'll focus and how in which they'll advance, and then socialize the recommendations that they're making for researchers or other parts of the healthcare continuum where decisions are being made. We go to the next slide, please. And so I wanted to share with you, this is their patient engagement management suite. And it just shows you, kind of calls out the different areas that they're focused in. So we've talked about patient engagement. You see some of the things that are relating to that. Fair market calculator, making sure that as you engage patients, you recognize that there's a cost to those patients to participate in a clinical trial, to come in and advise perhaps a clinical trial sponsor as to how they might even structure that trial. For those times when patients are asked to represent themselves and other patients in a process where we're learning, where we're seeking their advice, we feel that there should be some compensation for that. So the National Health Council, in concert with PFMD, created this fair market value calculator, and I understand it's quite useful to so many parts of the healthcare discovery process in fairly compensating patients for their time, effort, and the cost they incur to be a part of a process that's so important to us. Patient training, engagement training, there's modules available for that. You also see patient experience mapping, something that the National Health Council has contributed to this discussion, as well as what I mentioned earlier with taxonomy, other nuts and bolts ways in which we can help researchers and then those that are interpreting research for translation into the work that's being done in the clinical trial process, the drug development process, the structure of treatment and care. That translational aspect is something that's a real priority for us and for PFMD. Just talking to the head of PFMD this morning about how can we make sure that not only is the research as well informed as it could be through patient engagement, but how can we then take that research and make sure that it's applied in ways that continue to honor that patient engagement and what we know is a correct methodology to get the results that we're looking for. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to share this with you because the PFMD has created, with input from many American participants like us and others who may even be on this call, but I really like this 7 patient engagement quality criteria because it really is an easy way for us to say, so hello again, what is it that we really need to be attentive to? And of course, behind each of these headings is, recommendations, processes, tools, and information that would support how to make this happen. But of no surprise, so if we think about patient engagement and what are the criteria to make sure that these interactions with patients are the best that they can be, we're talking about a shared purpose, establish that shared purpose with a patient. Respect and accessibility. The patient has to feel like a person whose opinion is valued. This is critical. Representativeness of stakeholders. And I know the National Health Council has resources about representativeness and what does that mean? Roles and responsibilities. Be clear with patients about what's expected of them in a process like this and how they might personally benefit and how their engagement then will benefit others. The capacity and capability of engagement. And this is something I think is critical for us to think about as patient advocates, as organizations that'll support patients being engaged in these processes. We have to recognize there's a certain level of capacity that needs to occur around the patient to support them in understanding the process, participating in the process, maybe being compensated through the fair market value calculator. But also, when you saw in that early chart, we have had pretty significant success in inserting a patient engagement opportunity in so many different decision-making processes. Many of those have advisory committees or task forces, working groups, others that are standing. We need to make sure that there's a pipeline for patients that are prepared and aware that these opportunities exist so that they can make sure that the seats that we work so hard to create are actually filled with patients who can then contribute to decision-making. Transparency and communication, documentation, that's something, of course, we're all very interested in. And then thinking about continuity and sustainability, both of these efforts, but then what comes of these efforts. So I wanted to share that with you. We can go to the next slide to just really get a sense, I think, of how PFMD, but I think how all of us are thinking about the critical criteria for success. I just wanted to kind of flash these at you, but these are the scaling and in patient engagement in drug development, the strategies that PFMD have laid out. So you'll see, there's a strategy here about, drug development and how patient engagement is critical in that space. You go the next slide. And you'll see strategies about developing and employing patient engagement enablers, really creating a system and supports within that system for a strong patient engagement experience and the kind of outcomes and impacts that we're looking for. And then the last set of strategies. Go to the next slide, please. There we go. Is really building a community of individuals, both through digital health, data collection, the systems that are there, build strategies of how to engage that full community and making sure that health and data are very much a part of that process and are supported. And I think that's critical. We can go to the next slide, please. And then I'm closing with this slide just so that we do have some time for Q&A, and that's where I would encourage my colleagues and Ellie as well to jump in. But in terms of describing the patient-focused medicine development work, the landscape, we're also describing kind of the totality of the work that we're all doing together. And so I just wanted to put this up in front of you because it's impressive. I would invite you to look at the resources that are kind of referenced here, all of the different areas of activity that go from engagement with government, engagement with industry, engagement with the research community, engagement with providers of care and the patient groups. You'll see here a lot of touch points that you would want to assess as to whether they would be of value or of interest to your constituency and your organization specifically. And right up front, I know the slide introducing this section talked about pfmd.org. That's a really robust website for learning more about that organization. And I think you'll be pleased to see just how much the American sector, our colleagues, including and many of you yourself, have contributed to what you're seeing represented there with PFMD. So I'll close by welcoming your comments, encourage you to look at the resources that are available on this topic with through the National Health Council website and PFMD website. Absolutely stay engaged with us on how PDUFA moves forward and those really impressive accomplishments that have occurred around patient engagement as a result of PDUFA continue to deepen and expand. I personally have been involved in a number of calls with the international community, with advocates in Mexico and other parts of the world who have observed what we've been able to accomplish by having that patient engagement focus, patient-focused drug development placed in FDA through statute and then through regulation and guidance. And that's the model that they're interested in. They don't want patient engagement to be something that occurs or doesn't occur at the whim of kind of a sponsor in their local government or something that just comes and goes, but something that they can count on as patients and patient advocates. And so I think the topics that Ellie suggested were of interest to the Alliance, I think are exactly the topics that are of interest to people, advocates across the world, because by engaging patients meaningfully and respectfully in the decisions that affect their health, everybody wins. And we know that certainly through the leadership of Research America and so much of what they do. So Ellie, I'll stop there. I'll invite my colleagues to pay attention to the questions that are raised. and I'm happy to engage with Alliance members.
What a terrific presentation. I'm wowed. Speaking of leadership, Randy, I wanted to just make sure I can't see the chat for unknown reasons. I'm a technophobe. Did we put a link to PFMD membership into the chat? If not, if Aaron, if one of our talented colleagues could try to do that. And the other thing I'd say, Randy, is that I'm going to ask Mary, make her aware of this, to put into our weekly letter.
Right.
If she chooses to. It's actually her weekly letter, which comes out tomorrow. And I'll also put a link in case anyone wants to sign up for that. It's open outside our membership, although we want you to be members. And so we'll put a link to the weekly letter, which has a bunch of things like this, opportunities like this, and information about what's going on in the Hill, that kind of thing.
That's great.
I have 10 million questions, and I'm gonna go to one, a really good one from Bernie Siegel, and hi Bernie, who is in the audience. He's asking about cell therapies and how patient engagement, patient-informed drug development works in that context.
Boy, I think, that's such an exciting area of discovery and so important for us to move forward. And because it's in some ways new and emerging, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that this conversation really does reach those areas of research where cell therapy is being advanced. So I can't speak specifically as to how I know that that's the case, but I will say that both in academic institutions where research is occurring, the patient groups, that are so involved in frontline research themselves, and then those companies that are involved in cell therapy research, they have been at the table for a lot of these discussions. And so I think for Bernie, bravo to ask that question, maybe become an advocate to just ask that of the
he is that's what I was thinking. Bernie, join PFMD, have your group join
Yes.
PFMD, make it happen.
Exactly. And I don't know if my colleagues have heard specific examples of that area of discovery where this is so critical, but we have to literally flood the airwaves with just saying that no activity should be going forward without having patients engaged the way you described, Ellie. And also now we have the tools, and these are evidence-based tools. These are published, this is published research that describes pathways. And so I know when Bernie contacts some of these leaders in the cell therapy, gene therapy space, they may say, well, that's, is that anecdotal? What do we really know? How does a very measured and careful process like ours respond to that? Well, fortunately, we have, the kinds of input that they should be able to respond to. And we'd be happy to brainstorm about that kind of offline if that would be helpful.
Yeah, and Randy, are those those pieces of evidence that you have, those studies, is there a one-stop shop for those? I mean, do you all have those online on your website, or should we just, because that would be a great resource, because we do get that sometimes. Like, what's the evidence behind this?
I've always said, Ellie, that you're ahead of your time because you're so amazing and innovative. There's a conversation going on right now about how we might reach out to all of the organizations like those on this call, certainly Research America and so many of our patient group partners, and just survey them as to what evidence-based research have they been a part of, and try to create a single portal and then build on that. So to answer, yes, there is research citations and research. I know our website in these spaces has a lot of that information.
Okay.
And that would be the first place to look. But you're such a forward thinker that literally just over the past few weeks, there has been a conversation about, do we think that'd be helpful? So we're actually going to be convening stakeholders like yourselves and just ask that question. If we created a repository, that we would start by reaching out to all of us that are involved in this, and at least start there, would that be of use? And I think a vote of one from you says yes, it would. So I'm hoping we can proceed with that.
Well, I didn't win lotto, as you guys know, because I have to wait till Friday to win it. I won the lotto on this question. So Sam, hey, can you join us? I know we don't have too much time, but I know there are a lot of questions for Randy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Randy. This has been such an amazing conversation today. So we have a question about device development, actually. So we're talking today about drug development, but are there opportunities for patient engagement
Yeah.
device
Yes,
development?
there absolutely is. That's such a great question. Everything that we've talked about here is germane and applicable to the medical device and technology development process. Now, many of the examples I use, many examples you'll see, are really targeting toward clinical trials or medicine development, because that was kind of the first place where we really generated so much activity. But I'm pleased to serve on the board of the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. And they've got new leadership now with Andy Fish. Very exciting to see them go forward. This is
wonderful.
absolutely an area that they are interested in. And it's everything from better understanding, patient preference and how does that relate to core impact sets and how does that get translated. They are absolutely present. And so all of this would apply. And then some of the clinical or some of the evidence-based research, some of those citations that Ellie and I were talking about would apply to medical devices and technology. There is interest, though, and you saw that called out with PFMD, about making sure that digital health is an area that we don't miss out on. And so there's some discussion about how we might try to use some of this learning in the patient engagement space and the best practices to apply to digital health and health technology development. Because if any of you have ever fielded those calls from very excited people that have the next best app, the first thing I say is, so how have patients responded? Are they asking for this? And there's always dead silence because they're so excited about the technology. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but. And so that's a super good question.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So another question that we had come through, how do we get patient communities to feel more comfortable working closely with life science innovators to inform drug development? What can we do to reduce the barriers that existed and to elevate awareness of FDA and clinical trial transformation initiative guidance recommending engagement from the get-go?
I think there's been enough attention to this that we should have an expectation that anybody involved in this space would at least have as a goal being more in tune with patient engagement and in all the ways that we've been talking about. But we've got resources on our website, the classrooms, literally, that help people say, if preparing for this kind of process, how do you think about engaging, whether it's a plan sponsor, whether it's a medical device innovator, how can you go about having that conversation? And so there literally are examples of how the language you might use, the approach you might take. I do think, though, Sam, there's definitely more opportunity for us to share stories, talk about common experiences, what worked or didn't work. And then if we do have a less than optimal experience, and that's going to happen, not everybody's at the same readiness stage, then we should really together say, well, how can we help that company, that individual, that academic research institution better understand this issue? And then that's where we could say, well, let's have a call, let's have a conversation, let's try to promote that. And we'd be very open to being a part of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I'm seeing going into the chat, which I'm delighted with, my expert backup team putting in some very specific links and references. So I encourage all of those that do have questions and they're posting in the chat to definitely look to see what's there. Mike Walsh included, who I see is participating and contributing. We couldn't ask for better talent. What else?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ellie. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Mike's question is terrific. He's talking about kind of old silos and barriers, and the fact that there may be comfort level issues here. Randy, how do we get to the kind of the non-factual, more relational issues or stumbling blocks?
It is a great question, and we know we bump into this. I think we should go back to that first slide. Silence equals, well, if not death, certainly not a disservice to our constituency. So I think we have got to speak up. And, as Mike knows, and he's such a tremendous advocate, we just have to not take no for an answer. We actually have to not take not now as an answer, but just simply say, no, the time is now. Now, fortunately, we're seeing expectations being built in Europe and here in the United States, where let's say the clinical trial process, where around like clinical trial diversity, we're actually calling on sponsors to say, what's your plan? How are you going to try to advance a clinical trial that is more diverse, that looks more like the population ultimately that this device or medicine will serve? That creates an incentive then for some of the people that may not have been in tune here to know that they're going to have to report and be accountable. And I think that we can leverage that because it's not easy. And I think even those companies that made the best faith effort to move in this direction at any level are finding that it's not easy. They will benefit from our patient group experience and support. And I think we've got tools and can evolve additional tools to try to make that more effective. But it's out there. I tell you, any one of you in the cocktail conversation, because, as advocates, many in Washington, we're such nerds when it comes to going out into our private lives. And we talk about these issues, right? When you talk, you're going to talk about patient engagement and people are going to be, oh yeah, I think about you're going to find examples of where by virtue generationally, by virtue of the training that people have that come up through the system, it's not a natural. They're not immediately skilled. They aren't being taught how to engage patients, but that's where we've got the tools now. So we just need to be the conduit in helping them use those tools. And then it becomes natural. And boy, that will be reinforcing because when they are involving patients in that way with whatever it is they're trying to accomplish in their role, they're going to have a better outcome. And they're going to feel better about it. And we know that's true. I know physicians have been interviewed or surveyed and have said that the level of satisfaction, the improvement in health treatment and outcome goes way up when when they've engaged patients in the way we suggest.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we're a little over time. We have so many great questions and so much wonderful information that you can share with us. So I think at this point, I'll throw it back to Ellie and we can wrap up.
Oh, Randy, could you just stay just for a couple of days? Just a couple of days.
Let me check with my experts. Well, I'll stay for a lifetime, Ellie, like you. We've been doing this for a while because we're passionate about it. And this is an area where we can feel so good about making a difference. So I'll stay for as ever long as it takes to help support this conversation with everybody on the call today and other stakeholders. You can find me at the National Health Council. You'll find my colleagues here. That's a conduit, certainly for Research America, where we're collaborating all the time. I would say that you can count me in alongside you and others. We're there for anyone that wants to explore this further.
That's good because
yes,
of course you're going to have invitations in your inbox with high importance. You've been so wonderful, and I know we have housekeeping, and as Sam knows, I can't ever remember housekeeping, so don't look in my condo. But Sam, if you could do that part for us, that would be fabulous. And
absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Randy. It's been wonderful.
Absolutely.
And for everyone on the call, we hope you can join us next week on August 3rd at 11 a.m. for our next Alliance discussion. We'll be featuring Dr. Dan Bausch, and he will be speaking to us on monkeypox, a very hot button issue. So please make sure to join us. I'll put a link to register in the chat right now. And again, thank you so much, Randy. It's been a wonderful conversation. And Elliot.
And let me just say that there is no one better than Dr. Bausch on really any infectious disease issue. This one, I'm actually going to start my Zoom now and wait.
Really timely, exactly.
This week and next week, extraordinary speakers. I put my contact information in the chat somewhere for Diana. And I hope that you all will use it too if you want to talk about anything. Issues, problems, research, whatever. Membership, of course, although I can't even sell Girl Scout cookies and talk about membership is not my role here. We have wonderful folks that are much better informed and good about that. So, but thank you all for joining us, really, and we'll see you next week.
Great. Thank you, Research America and the Alliance.
Talk to you soon, Randy.
Bye-bye.